shall overcome. He shall overcome. He shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I know that I do believe. Oh, we shall overcome some.
Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. And today's show is Reunion. I am so sorry that I haven't made a new show for you in 20 months. I did work with Lisa Smith to do a little Zoom video, but I found looking at myself on the screen was so awkward and uncomfortable that I had real trouble improvising. I collect the objects and the ideas for these shows over a period of weeks or even months sometimes if it's a complicated or serious subject. And I use my visual objects as mnemonic devices so that I can remember what it was that I wanted to say during the show. But it's not scripted. I don't have a writing team. I'm the writer. And so I do improvisation into the camera. Well, I don't know how many of you have ever talked to yourself in the mirror. In my book, Saigon's Deadly Game, I have one of the secondary characters, Tu Kim's friend, Dao Tin, talking to herself in the mirror. But you don't know that until after Tu Kim, who's very quick on the uptake, uses her friend's technique of speaking positive affirmations into the mirror to give yourself courage when you're afraid. I wrote that long before COVID. I wrote it with the help of some friends at NaNoWriMo, and one of my dear friends who was a mentor and a real blessing in my life was lost to me this year. And I know that many of you have lost people too. This COVID is not a joke, and it has absolutely nothing to do with politics. It's a virus. It's a virus that kills people who are susceptible to it. As those of you who've watched the show in the past know, my husband is a frontline healthcare worker. When the pandemic hit, I spent weeks at my sewing machine making face masks. This one is a Mexican holiday, the Day of the Dead. We know it here in the United States as Halloween. It comes from the Catholic tradition, All Hallows Eve. It was a mythology that one day in the year, the dead got up and walked among the living. And you couldn't see them because they were spirits. But the Catholics believe that Jesus told his disciples when he knew that he was going to be murdered because he spoke truth to power. The Hebrew government was corrupt, and the Jews had been subjugated by the Romans, and they were living in occupied territory in the Middle East, and their purported leaders were doing nepotism. They hired their family members and they were doing graft. They gave financial benefits to their friends and they were being sexist. They mistreated and abused women, especially women whose husbands were killed. They took advantage of widows and orphans. And during Bible days, there was slavery. Not the sort of slavery that we think of here in the United States that's racially based, but anybody who was conquered by someone stronger was subject to kidnap and forced labor. Jesus was a radical. He was a very brave man, but he was also a realist, and he knew that once he began confronting corrupt, greedy, power-hungry people, that his days on the planet would be numbered. And so he warned his disciples that he was going to be killed. Some people think of this in terms of presentience, that he could see the future. And it was one of the traits that was used to prove that he was divine. He knew what was coming. In fact, the early Christians were very heavy into prophecy. But Jesus had lived in Egypt. He was taken there as a young boy, and he learned about Egyptian culture by growing up in it, even though his parents were Hebrews. They were Jewish people. And so he had the benefit of being bilingual, and because he was a boy, he was raised to be literate. And he also saw the life he lived with his mother, who had him out of wedlock, and his father, who betrothed her and protected her so that she wasn't murdered in an honor killing because she became pregnant when she wasn't married. Like, I don't think today's people understand how much of a hero Joseph was. He was engaged to this girl because of arranged marriages when she was too young to marry. And then about the time she was old enough to marry, she was pregnant already, and he had not touched her. And there's a little story that says he thought to put her away quietly, that she would live in confinement in her parents' house, have the baby, and the baby would be given to a married female relative to raise. That was the custom. And then the girl was then marriageable or not, depending on the time period and the social mores at that time. Frequently, the girls became what in 1950s America was called a spinster, even though very few unmarried women spun yarn. And the reason that I'm talking a lot about biblical times and religion, especially the Christian religion, is because there's a new law in Texas that a woman is not allowed to get an abortion in Texas after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Most of the time, most women do not even know that they are pregnant until 12 weeks of pregnancy. Many women skip one cycle. It's the second cycle that you miss where you go, uh-oh, I might be pregnant. And that's 60 days in. And the third cycle that you miss, then you go, oh, brother, I'm pregnant. Now, if you wanted a baby, that's all well and good. I can remember my husband and I wanting a second child and taking my temperature and having sex on certain days of the month to increase fertility and all that. We wanted my son Andrew. We wanted a second child. But I didn't marry until I was 28 years old. And I had health issues, and I would get pregnant, and then I would have a miscarriage. I'm not sure how this law will impact women who miscarry naturally. What I do know is that there's a bounty hunting piece of this. Anybody who spies on women and turns them in for abortion to the state gets a $10,000 bounty. They're bounty hunters. There's an excellent TED Talk done recently, 2015, which is recent to me, by Jimmy Carter about these issues. If you look me up on Facebook, I have it on my Facebook page. And there's an earlier one that he does about why brothers, sons, fathers, husbands do not protect their daughters, their wives, their sisters, their aunties. President Carter says it's because they enjoy their male privilege. But the law says that if a woman is raped or if a girl is incested, that's a first-order adult relative sexually assaults a member of their family. And if that young person, typically a child, a preteen, young girl, is impregnated, neither of those women is afforded the opportunity to end an unwanted pregnancy initiated through illegal, violent, or perverted means. There are taboos against incest because first-order relatives who have sex with one another produce defective babies. It's a genetic fact. If you look up the royalty in Europe and Google whack hemophilia, that's one of the most famous ones, but there's a whole lot of others. When Kevin and I lived in Newfoundland, some of the settlements happened due to shipwreck, and there might only be 5 or 6 or 7 surnames in the entire town. People came to Newfoundland from all over the world to study rare genetic defects because of inbreeding, people too closely related having children. You can see the results of this in dog breeds. Some dog breeds are prone to horrible, horrible health conditions. Ridgeback, for one, it's a spinal deformity. Like spina bifida in humans, it's a problem for the dog. It's a painful, debilitating thing that happens if you breed family members together. But this law in Texas says that a man can impregnate a woman against her will and she has to have the child. They're going to make her have this child. So there's a beautiful dance piece, and I'm going to share the link with you for YouTube. If you're watching over cable, just pause the video and write down the link. And then when you get on your computer and you want to watch YouTube videos, type in the link code and you'll get there. But the girls are lovely, and what they're saying is very important. I'm sorry to bring up such a weighty, heavy topic. I wanted to make you a happy show. I spent a lot of time preparing the props to talk about all the different ways I explored quilting during the lockdown. But this law in Texas is too important to ignore because it attacks the human rights of women, who are people, not chattel. After the year we've had with the Delta variant on the rise, the Delta variant is on the rise because when lawfully, duly elected Joe Biden asked the American people to give him 100 days to wear a mask and to get vaccinated, to wear gloves or sanitize their hands. People who were angry that Donald Trump's coup, premeditated attempt to overthrow the government and murder his own Vice President, Mike Pence, favored son of Indiana, and his longtime nemesis, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who protected him from being impeached over the double voting scam of 2016, in which every Democratic district was accused by the Republicans of a crime that didn't exist, double voting. And they did an analysis of common ethnic, religious, and female first names and last names. And they put these people's names on a list because they were common names, like Mary Murphy. They focused on females, Latinos, Black people, and Asian people. And once a common name was used in any Democratic district, no one with that name after that vote counted. Tens of thousands of votes that they knew would be for Hillary Clinton were not counted in 2016. Millions of women who detest the on your knees mentality of Donald Trump marched in the streets. Millions. And demanded of Speaker Pelosi that she impeach him for tampering with the election. Donald Trump advised his male supporters to subjugate women through genital wounding. Now, everybody knows that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote anyway. What people kind of gloss over is if the illegally deleted votes were counted, Hillary Clinton won every electoral vote she needed. Donald Trump never legally won the presidency at all. his entire presidency was a scam. And knowing that the pandemic would result in quarantines, and appointing DeJoy as the director of the United States Post Office, even though the man has clear financial conflicts of interest with competitors to the post office. He's heavily invested in competitors to the post office. And he went around Democratic districts and removed mail sorting machines and mailboxes. And Republicans closed down polling places. But Americans are not blind or deaf or stupid. We came out in record numbers, stood in line for hours, sometimes whole days, 18 hours in some places that are majority of black people, and we voted him out of office. And then he attempted to get the military to declare martial law on Black Lives Matter, because 3 officers of the law, 3 peace officers, were involved in murdering a black man, and the video went viral. 9 minutes. I can't breathe, with a known person, a bouncer at a bar in the nights who worked as a police officer on a day, knelt on the neck of an obese man in respiratory distress until he was dead. Murder in broad daylight, where everybody can see it on videotape, set loose a rage tornado in our country that sent black people and their sympathizers into the streets. Black Lives Matter. I watched this one woman talk about the social contract and how if you break the social contract by egregious acts, you can't expect the people to uphold the social contract. Thank God for General Milley. You might remember he was in fatigues. He was told they were going to go review the troops. He went out, and Donald Trump held up a Bible upside down in front of a church he'd never gone to. After tear gassing the square, in front of the church that was the first aid station for the protesters. And General Milley apologized to the United States and said he was so sorry, he did not understand, but he should not have been there. And he apologized that the United States military is not there to subjugate American citizens. It's there to defend Americans from all enemies, foreign and domestic. But the newly appointed Secretary of Defense, Miller, issued an order that has a barcode and can be tracked to the District of Columbia National Guard that they were not to issue flak jackets, face masks, other riot gear, or arms, armament, sidearms, heavier arms that were very much in evidence during Black Lives Matter. You can see the officers lined up on the Capitol steps. The orders were written that the DC National Guard was forbidden to intervene without direct orders on the afternoon of the 6th, and the orders were issued on the 4th. That's called premeditation. When you set up to leave the mostly black Capitol Police, heavily black Latino force in DC, because the United States government has a proactive hiring policy that subjugated groups get hiring preference, but so do veterans. Most of you watched what happened on the 6th. But the fact that the pro tem and the Speaker of the House and the Vice President, 1, 2, 3, the 3 members of the government who can take over if a president is incapacitated, they were all targets of the Proud Boys, and that it had been set up for months. Those of us that sat through the impeachment hearing, and I did, I watched every minute of it, we learned that these poor Capitol Police officers were set up to be injured and wounded by a much larger force of civilians, but also veterans and paramilitary groups. This law in Texas is illegitimate. It's tyranny. If you take the time to listen to President Carter's speech on YouTube, you'll hear him say, there's slavery going on right now, and it's in sex trafficking of kidnapped young women and some boys. The statistics on sexual assault in the military and sexual assault on college campuses is deeply distressing, but it's really important to understand what's at stake here. It's the viability of American life. One person, one vote, ever since the 1920s, when women who'd been fighting for over 150 years to have full sovereignty, to be treated as actual human beings, citizens. It was the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote. And Donald Trump said, prior to the election, I will abide by the results of the election if I win. Excuse me? What sporting event would you attend where one team had the hubris, the audacity to say, I'm not going to listen to the referees. I get to win. No matter what happens, I get to win. That's not democracy. That's not a race. I am so deeply disturbed by this that I'm not quite sure how to express it. What I know is the time for phone calls to your elected officials and letters to the editors and letters to your elected officials and sit-ins and marches and the peaceful means employed by Martin Luther King until he was murdered. The goal of equity, fairness, fair play, equal pay for equal work. I think of Jesus. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, care for the injured or the attacked, house the homeless, give alms to the poor. If you have 2 cloaks, give one to someone who has no cloak. He got killed for saying stuff like that. They murdered him. But he became an icon for the meek and the poor who would inherit the earth. Al Gore used to talk about talking truth to power. Not an easy thing to do. A. Milne, through Christopher Robin, tells Pooh Bear, "You're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think." Because Pooh would say, "I'm just a bear of little brain." I got a fortune once. A lot of fortunes are common, but I'm a Chinese fortune cookie fan, and I got a fortune shortly after I started this show when I was wondering, I don't get paid. This is public access. I'm not like Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow, who are on high-profile stations during newscasts doing editorialization, which is not news. They're talking about what they think about what happened and what they feel about what happened and what you should think about what happened and how you should feel about what happened, which is not journalism. It's not news. It's editorial. Well, I never pretended to be news. I'm just a senior citizen in Cape Ann talking about how the events and interactions I have in my life affect me and maybe you too. But I got this fortune when I was thinking, why am I investing all this time and energy into this endeavor of making Marjohn's Musings and collecting the props and coming up with the ideas and doing all the editing and posting it and all that? Like, why am I doing that? I'm an author first, before I'm a TV show host. I have books up on Amazon. Amazon.com, author Marjohn Love. And I would put that little byline, if you want to support the show, please buy the books. So I was feeling a bit discouraged kind of early on, partway into it, and I got this fortune that says, you begin to appreciate how important it is to share your personal beliefs. I put it in a keychain with a beautiful marquetry bird. I'd like to read you a memorial piece because so many of you have lost friends and family, loved ones. It's part of the Sun magazine, September issue 2021, a tribute to Chris Burke's The Thing with Feathers. The first thing you hear in the morning, the last you hear at night, in the woods, in the swamps, in the old steeple, in the ruined eaves, over the wreckage of a car, your mother drove straight into a wall. The bird won't stop singing. It is perched in the ashes of a house that burned to the ground. Wherever you move, It's one hop ahead of you, tireless as a creek. It's a tune that will not allow itself to be forgotten. It keeps building and leaving its nests, all chatter, all expectation, water singing to itself, in the shadows as well as in the sunlight. That insufferable optimist, no matter how many doors you slam, curses you shout, rocks you throw, it pipes up louder than ever. On this very branch of this very tree outside your house, as if stones must be your way of applauding, it was singing the morning you got fired, the day you brought grief to the person you most wanted to protect, the evening when the great cause you'd pledged yourself to failed. It sang while your father was writing his suicide note. The night your dear friend told you he was HIV positive. The night you could find nothing remaining to believe in, when all you wanted was to be left alone. It sings in places so dark you can't see into them. It's out there singing now. And the poem is dated November 2005. And the editor of The Sun put a little note. The date that appears after each poem indicate when they were published in The Sun. The poem struck my heart. It reminded me of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. My grandmother told me that the bride of a rich man is often a young woman given to him by her father. The captive bird in a gilded cage. I used a bookmark to mark the poem. It's a business card from the Floating Lotus for my 40th wedding anniversary. My husband bought me a fancy slat drum gong. You can find the same drum online through Amazon and have it delivered to your door for about half the price of what my husband paid. But he paid it anyway because we like the Floating Lotus and we wanted it to survive the pandemic. We didn't want the business to fail. We couldn't go to all of our favorite restaurants. Some of them were closed. And we decided we would focus on one restaurant because we can only go out to eat on our budget maybe once every week or 2 weeks. So we went to the Depot Diner. They made masks with their logo on them. And we went there 2-3 times a month, ordering our food for lunch because my husband works for Reliant Rehab, where 22 of his patients who survived the acute infection of the wild SARS-CoV-2 died of complications afterward. They got so sick they had to be sent back to the hospital, and they died at a time when there were no masks for my husband. They didn't have gowns or caps, booties or gloves. Personal protective equipment, it's called PPE. Donald Trump could have ordered the production of those vital supplies, and American businesses would have responded. But if you look close at my vaccination card, there's only one injection on it. I'd like to thank the Elks Club for hosting the Pfizer people. I have pernicious anemia. I have to take vitamin B12 shots. And over the course of years, because pernicious anemia doesn't go away, I began getting sensitized to injections, so that the last few vitamin B12 shots I got made my arms swell up. And unfortunately, I didn't think of that when I got the COVID-19 vaccine. And the Navy medic who gave me the shot for free, thank you God, used that same site, and I was in the car and began to experience anaphylaxis. Most people know that from penicillin. There are people who die from exposure to injectable penicillin or even oral penicillin. And the other one that's pretty famous is peanuts. There are people, especially young children, that if they eat peanuts, their face swells, their throat swells, and they go into acute respiratory distress, much like SARS-CoV-2. For those of you that think that the vaccine came out of thin air, SARS happened first, and people have been working night and day for years to prepare the vaccine for you. But I had my throat swell and my face swell, itch all over, and showed up at Addison Gilbert. And I said, I don't want to go to the ER. It's $250. I'm an OT, 27 years healthcare. I'm not in respiratory distress, but I'm on the premises in case it went that direction. And the nurse said, I want you to drink this water. I'll let the desk know to transport you to the ER if you let them know. And just sit here. Just sit here. You're mildly anaphylactic, but it can go south fast. So I wound up with the infection specialist, Dr. Wolf, who tested me to see if I had enough antibodies to fight off the virus with the one shot, and the fact that I caught the wild virus in February 2020. I'll tell you all about that later. And when they did my blood work, I'm not protected. I don't have enough spike protein. I don't have enough natural antibodies. And I'm hurt and I'm angry that greedy, power-hungry men told people not to get the vaccine when it would have stopped the pandemic in its tracks. I put a cartoon up on my Facebook page. It's a mother and a daughter, and the daughter says to the mother, Mom, what's that thing on your arm? It's a smallpox vaccine scar, the mom says. And the daughter says, why don't I have one? And the mom says, because it worked. Who do you know ever got smallpox? We used to get measles that left people deaf and blind. We used to get pertussis that caused children to cough themselves to death. We used to get rubella that left kids cerebral palsied, brain damaged. We came up with vaccines. When was the last time you heard of anybody having the measles? When was the last time you heard of anybody having rubella? When was the last time you saw a child die of pertussis? Or how about the bloody flux or polio? Vaccines work. This Delta variant could have been prevented. And I'm hurt. And I'm angry because my beloved husband still goes to work to take care of the survivors. Because just because you live through this virus does not mean you're recovered and you're well. So many people are so damaged in their heart and their lungs, their nerves, their major organ systems, that they wind up in rehabilitation, not like drug rehabilitation, to be able to walk, to be able to talk, to feed themselves, to dress themselves, to bathe themselves. My husband gets up in the morning and stares down death because people wanted to make Biden fail. $600,000 people dead due to negligence, incompetence, and maliciousness. I can't cope. I can't cope. I was going to try to cheer you all up. And I realized I haven't been sleeping because I collected coins in cans for Bill Baird. My best friend, my maid of honor, went to work terrified when people were bombing Planned Parenthood clinics. I say people, mostly angry men and self-righteous women who've never been raped. To use the Bible for maliciousness and evil. Evil is the infliction of harm upon others for pleasure. That's what evil is. You hurt someone else for fun. That's the definition of evil. And like I said, I'm not the news, and I don't have a staff to vet things and fact check. But I have read in several sources that Donald Trump bribed the Taliban, got money to them so that they would not attack United States troops and citizens in Afghanistan. If you look at the Constitution, and you can buy a copy, all over the place there's copies, giving money to a sworn enemy during a time of war is the definition of treason, which is punishable by death. I don't know if the allegations are true, But if they are, after a 20-year war, aiding and abetting an enemy is far more serious than the horrible things that happened on January 6th, which actually happened. We need to be proactive people. We gotta do what we need to do now. This is Marjohn Love, and this has been Marjohn's Musings.